Hello, welcome to another episode of Museum Moments. My name is Ellie Gettinger. I'm the Education Director at Jewish Museum Milwaukee, and I am delighted to share with you today about kind of the broader, we spend a lot of time focused on Milwaukee. We're the Jewish Museum of Milwaukee. It makes sense, but we're also a Jewish museum that reflects a statewide history. And so today I wanted to explore a little bit on the towns and all of the different places around the state that had Jewish life. And who better to bring in than Andy Muchin, who for the Wisconsin Small Communities History Project through the Wisconsin Society for Jewish Learning. And he's a journalist. He hosts the Sounds Jewish podcast and radio show. And today Andy's going to share his knowledge with us about the breadth of Wisconsin Jewish communities. And hopefully as we go forward, and you guys can throw this in the comments, which communities should we explore in a little more depth? Tell us where we should go on this travelogue next. So, Andy, tell us a little bit about this project and how you got involved in its genesis.
Well, I got involved actually as a volunteer in this project around 2002 when the Wisconsin Society for Jewish Learning really wanted to go back to its roots, which were in 1954, growing out of the tricentennial celebration of Jewish life in North America. A statewide committee formed, did some research on Wisconsin Jewish history then. 50 years later, the Wisconsin Society for Jewish Learning was looking into exploring the history again. I needed a job, and it worked that my experience, having grown up in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, having edited the Wisconsin Jewish Chronicle for years, fit pretty well with this project, and I came on board.
So as you started this massive undertaking of kind of documenting and taking on earlier research, but bringing it up to date, the kind of breadth of Wisconsin Jewish life, what was your kind of focusing energy? How did you start? How do you start something that massive?
I think it took a while to really figure out where to start. Some of it was just coming up with an approach to how to study a community. What did we really want to do? And it came down to doing documentary research, meaning looking at documents, which often were city directories. We could pick up what the Jews were doing and when, looking through newspaper clippings, and then finding Jews who both lived in the communities and used to live in the communities to talk to. So it was a combination of all of that kind of digging.
So I know right now a lot of us are really thinking about Kenosha, and I know that the Jewish community of Kenosha has been impacted by what is happening. Can you give us a sense of the history? And I think people nationally, and I'm not sure what our national reach is, but might be surprised that there is a synagogue in Kenosha and what that history looks like. Can you give us a little bit of a sense of the Kenosha Jewish history?
Well, sure. Rabbi Dina Feingold, whom we've been reading about and who has spoken so eloquently to the media, has been the rabbi, I think, for 36 years of Beth Hillel Temple, which is a Reform congregation that the community established in the mid-1920s. If you ever go to Kenosha, you can see the building. It's this huge gray stone building. It looks like a bank or a library or something, kind of near the center of town. And actually, if you look at the top of the front of the building, you can see the words in stone, Jewish Community Center. It was part of that movement in the 1920s to actually not only have a synagogue, but have a community gathering place. And it was built with a basketball gym in it, I'm told. In any case, so there was, at about that time, in the late 1920s, according to the American Jewish Yearbook, there were 900 Jews living in Kenosha. There also was established 10 or 20 years earlier, I've read different dates, an Orthodox synagogue that was still functioning. The building's still there, and I think Chabad of Wisconsin uses it occasionally for services.
And what were the sorts of things that took people to Kenosha in particular? And then as we look at some of these other communities, what was the thing that was driving Jewish settlement there?
That's a great question. Jews mostly went in the early and mid 20th centuries to communities where, A, they could earn a living, and B, if they really wanted some Jewish contact and Jewish community, they'd go to places where there were Jewish institutions. Kenosha, was a big auto building town and a factory town in general. Jews didn't go work in factories usually when they went around Wisconsin, but they did go to towns where they could work in stores, and many Jews owned the stores that sold to the other people in town, and that's what brought many of them there. The next generation would sometimes become professionals in these communities, lawyers, doctors, dentists, that kind of thing.
And as you were kind of looking into, I know some of these stores, these small shops, were not so mom and pop by the end, that some of them actually grew and had a more regional presence. Were there any any of those commercial endeavors that really struck you as you were researching?
Well, I think in Green Bay, the Baum family had a large department store that was known in the city and probably outside the city. It's been over 10 years since I did this research, so some of this stuff isn't at the tip of my thoughts right now. Other large Jewish businesses, though, if you go to Eau Claire, the Presto company, which was bought in the 1930s by the Phillips family, which had come from Manitowoc, actually, grew into a national power in its industry by figuring out how to market a new pressure cooker, the Presto pressure cooker. The Phillips family then was generous not only to our Jewish Community Histories Project, but very much so in Eau Claire and around the region. At the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, there must be at least a half a dozen buildings named for the Phillips. So not only were they successful in the community, they gave back.
As and I think that this is the thing that is really kind of awe-inspiring, is that there were it is my understanding there were over 200 cities that had some sort of Jewish settlement in it, if it's a family here or there. What were the kind of how would you say the kind of, if you were going to describe the life cycle of one of these smaller Jewish communities, what would it look like? And is there something, in terms of looking at your experience growing up in Manitowoc or, one of these cities, that you could almost say is the prototypical, this is descriptive of this? Or is it all so varied city by city, what their communities looked like?
I think you have to look at the size of communities. There were communities, and in my research, I broke it down to communities, say, that had enough of a community, and a community with some wherewithal to actually build a synagogue. And there were over 20 of those small town communities throughout Wisconsin that had synagogues at one time, all the way from the 1870s, really, until now. The story in many of these communities is they had their run. Maybe they had a good run of community for 50 or 60 years. They had a synagogue. There was a rabbi there. They might have established a cemetery. Jews were involved in B'nai B'rith and Hadassah and other organizations. Then gradually the economies changed in these cities, and there was less reason for Jews to stay around. And in many cases, the communities shrink. Some of them can't keep their synagogues open anymore. Some of them can't even have an informal congregation anymore. That's really boiling it down. But there are cities, I grew up in Manitowoc. The synagogue was formed there in 1900. The community still owns the building, but I don't think uses it anymore. And if anybody from Manitowoc's listening, please jump in. But, in the 1960s, when I was there, I remember the sanctuary was full with maybe 150 people on High Holy Days. I lost you there. Well, I can see and hear me. Ellie, are you there? Okay, Ellie's there. I'm going to just I'll keep talking. Oh boy, I wish I read
Testing.
lips. Yeah. Okay.
I'm here.
Okay,
I'm just
good.
adding.
Well, while I'm here, and I hope somebody's watching, we should talk about Sheboygan, which is one of the remarkable stories. A city, at least in the Midwest, known as Little Jerusalem for its active Jewish community. There were 1,000 Jews there in the 1920s and 30s. They had 3 Orthodox synagogues. There actually was a Jewish neighborhood in Sheboygan where most of the Jews lived. I think that was partly because there was a landlord who was renting to Jews in a particular area, but they had their synagogues there. They had I think they had a kosher butcher there. They even had a workers' circle, then called Workman's Circle, a Yiddish library that was used as a meeting place. So there were some non-Orthodox Jews there too. It was a very kind of frum Orthodox place for a number of decades. And one story I heard was that there were many peddlers in the 1920s and 30s. They would go to synagogue in the morning, drink a l'chaim, a shot of whiskey, and then they'd go out and do their work for the day. Another story I heard about Sheboygan involves the state treasurer, Solomon Levitin, who came to Wisconsin as a peddler in the 1880s and opened a store in New Glarus, eventually worked his way to Madison, became involved in the Progressive Party. He was a friend of Bob LaFollette's. He said he sold him a pair of suspenders when he was a peddler, and he said, "I've been supporting LaFollette ever since." And that was a joke he used in many of his campaign speeches. He came to Sheboygan, I'm told, and campaigned in Yiddish in the 1930s, among the Jewish community there. So
I'm hoping you can hear me, Andy. I'm not
now
sure.
Now I can.
Excellent. And I think we're going to have to wrap up. But one question that comes to mind is there's so many aspects of Jewish life, especially Orthodox Jewish life, that require specific things. I'm thinking about kosher food. Did most of these communities have self-sustaining kosher butchers, or were they shipping meat in from bigger
They were
places?
shipping meat. Yes, they were shipping meat, in the early days by train. But yes, they were shipping meat. When I was growing up in the 1960s, there was still a kosher meat distributor in Sheboygan, so that was easy in Manitowoc. But many of us would come to Milwaukee for our meat. Everybody had big freezers, in the basement, and so kosher was a challenge that many people were able to meet. Leonard Loeb, who was an active attorney, told me, 15 years ago that he remembered growing up in Wisconsin in the 40s and 50s. And he said you could get a kosher meal anywhere you went in the state because there was some Jewish family who could accommodate you. You'd never have to eat treif.
That's amazing.
There were
one of our active volunteers. One of our active volunteers, her husband grew up in Fond du Lac. Her husband's family is from Fond du Lac, Sheboygan, and Appleton. And her sense is that many of the children decided when they wanted to meet someone Jewish that they moved somewhere else to a bigger Jewish community, and that was one of the things that led to the downfall of some of these smaller communities as well.
I think so too. And the GI Bill, in a sense, suddenly all these young Jewish men and women who served in the military in World War II could go off to college, and many of them never wanted to return. Also, the economy's changed, and running a small business didn't seem like a viable option, and so there wasn't so much of the generational succession in these small stores. It was another issue. But I think the comment you made was correct too. I'm not hearing you, unfortunately.
So Thank you so much for sharing this moment with us. And for everybody, there've been some good comments here about some of these pieces. If there's a city that you're like, yeah, I want to know more, comments.